Hey, in today's video, we talked to Gustaf Fjelstrom from Botch Creative. He's a good friend of ours, and he's made a few series for Pixel Preacher, but recently he made the Jonah series, and it looked incredible, so we wanted to pick his brain and figure out how he made it and the techniques he used. So we spent a lot of time talking about storyboards, X particles, and water simulations instead of Cinema 4D. We spent a lot of time talking about compositing and using the ACES color space, going from Cinema over to After Effects, and how to properly set that up for compositing. So we learned a ton, we had a blast, so sit back and enjoy, and we hope you learned something. So, Gustaf, thanks for joining us, and tell us, give me a 2-minute overview of who you are and what you do.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. My name is Gustaf Fjelstrom, and I am a freelance motion designer. And I've been freelance for about 3 years now, after a whole career on the agency side. So, just really enjoying my newfound freedom of just doing cool projects now. So. I have a background in illustration and sort of learned the motion design thing sort of on the job, growing up in the agency world, and now just kind of putting all that to good use on the motion design side. I realized that was a lot quicker than 2 minutes, but
no, that's perfect. So if you don't know, Pixel Preacher in a nutshell, we just make editable sermon series content for churches to use. So we want to bring the quality and excitement of title sequences you may see on shows sort of into the church and be able to tell the gospel story that way, but also be able to have churches edit it because they know they might not want a series to be called Jonah. They might want it to be called something else. So that's in a nutshell what we do is we give those project files over to churches to use. So now let's jump into Jonah, because this was one we've been wanting to make for a long time, but wanted to do it right. And you had some free time and you make killer stuff, so we said Gustaf was the man for it. Jonah has that vibe of, it's a very popular Bible story. It sort of has that children's story that we just kind of know, oh, the guy fell off the boat and he got swallowed by a fish and spit up. But we wanted to introduce that idea, but also say this is more than just that. This story is bigger than that, and it's not what you probably think it is. So that was sort of the way we went with the script, keeping it broad, but also introducing that new vibe without being so cliche. So you sent me the storyboards. Tell me a little bit about that process as far as just how you start. Because, I mean, your storyboards were almost an exact image of your final product. So go through that a little bit with us.
Sure. Yeah, and just to tag on a little bit about the concept. Yeah, it actually took me we actually were talking about this for a couple months before I even started. And it took a while to kind of get a hook into what I felt comfortable doing for Jonah. And like you said, everyone kind of knows the children's story of Jonah, but once you kind of get into it and you kind of study it, it's kind of a weird book. And I just wanted to sort of unearth that deeper narrative that, we just get beyond the children's story. So that was in and of itself was the whole crux of the concept for the thing. So with the storyboards, they ended up being fairly tight with where I ended up. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I spent a good amount of time on the storyboards, and I to some extent, it's kind of like a different thought process for me. So instead of sitting at the computer, I'm drawing these on my iPad, and it lets me really kind of sit and think, really sort of internalize the content of the images. So both how the images are constructed and how they're composed, but also just how they're sort of fitting together. So, spending this time sort of rendering these in this storyboard fashion, when I have the time anyway, is very kind of a luxury some of the times. But it just kind of helps me get in the right frame of mind. And on this one, it was pretty important. And I think that's why they kind of ended up being very close to what we ended up in the final piece here.
Yeah, definitely. So you said you use an iPad. What app do you use for that?
Procreate. Yeah.
Procreate.
It's pretty much the standard go-to for me for drawing on the iPad, and it's by far the best digital drawing experience that I've used. Like, because I've had Wacom's for a while, and I'm currently on a Wacom Cintiq pen display, and that's awesome too. But as far as like just the feel of the drawing on the iPad with the Apple Pencil, it's way far beyond what the Wacom does.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, my background is in illustration, so I grew up drawing. So this is very comfortable for me, and it's something I enjoy. And again, it sort of just gets me in the right headspace for doing the rest of the project.
Yeah, that's where we differ. If I try to draw storyboards, it is an absolute nightmare. I don't even do it. I don't even try. If I need to, it's gonna be stick figures and squares, and it's pretty embarrassing. So I don't ever share those with anybody. So for your main source of models and things like that, do you use Quixel Mega Scans or just a collection of different sites?
Yeah, it's any combination or wherever I can find the right model and such. So in this case, a lot of the books came from TurboSquid. TurboSquid is a pretty easy go-to place for it. Depending on the asset, sometimes use the Quixel Megascans, and those assets are fantastic. Those are my two primary places. And then if there's something else that I have to find somewhere else, that's I'll just go there. So it's
I love the book. The bookcase was very had a lot of detail in it. All the books, I guess maybe was just like a collection that you stuck in there and maybe retextured and moved around.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
It looked really good. It had a very fantasy type vibe, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later as far as your compositing goes. But so let's kind of break down a couple of scenes when the book comes out and flips open. First question: book animation, is that a pre-made animation, or did you
it is not. It is a there's actually it's a book rig that I bought.
Was it book what's it called? Because we did a series like for a broad James or any book of the Bible series where the book opens up and you can kind of flex the pages and things like that.
Yep.
What was it called? I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, it was great. It was super good. Okay, I kind of what I thought, but I wanted to.
Yeah, that was like one of the biggest sort of R&D pieces that I wanted to figure out first. And that rig actually turned out to work really well because there's quite a bit you could do to customize it as far as the look it goes and the pages. So yeah, for the opening, there was basically one hero book, and it's got an animation system that you can tell it to open, and then it'll fan the pages. And
that was a lifesaver whenever I found that one. Because I tried to do it on my own. Like I can make a book. It's just some squares and some pages and planes and.
Yeah.
Not the case. Not the case at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
makes you look real good. Makes you like you know what you're doing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So when the water comes out, break that down, because that's a big part of the whole project. You have I'm guessing some of those bubbles in the water are sort of all part of the same system. So walk us through just a quick overview of how you built the water and.
Sure. So yeah, the book open was the book rig, and then the water, all the water in the simulations was all X particles. I spent a good amount of time trying to wrangle X particles to varying degrees of success, and then once I was able to get a decent simulation going, then I would export those as Alembic files. And then bring those back into Cinema and render those.
And they're just and then you just kind of drop them on top of the book.
Yeah.
Your mind tells you, like the X particles are coming off of the, or being birthed from the pages. Which is great. That's the illusion you want to give.
Yeah. So this is just what we're looking at now is just a hardware render of that, Yeah, really. There's in the main water. There's really no collisions with the pages or anything. It was just basically a real quick transition element, so we can kind of get away with it. There were some other using X particles in the X particles, you can set up like XP foam to kind of generate more particles. So I did a couple passes of that too, where you can see that these little particles that kind of emit from the water, and then just compositing those on top.
Okay.
But the water renders tend to be like super long just because of all the refractions inside.
Yeah. Was it so you didn't do like with this? We didn't do like any sort of flip domain type thing. You just have you just add like a fluid simulator or whatever on top.
Yeah,
of it.
I mean, with X particles, there's several different kind of water simulations you can try. I forget which. I kind of just messed around until I found the right one. Let me see if I can open up. I just had a particle emission. Okay, yeah. So here's my X particles rig. So I just did this like in a separate file. I'd had just one emitter basically shooting. Let me turn off my XP mesher. So yeah, basically one emitter shooting particles out. And for this one, I was using, it wasn't a PBD domain. It was just the fluid effects solver with XP sheeter and XP foam. So I have these are all cache, so that's why it's playing relatively nice. So I had just
now
had these.
Sheeter. You were saying one. I'll never even use sheeter. I think I've gone as far as fluid effects. With X particles, I will bring it up for a project and then I have to relearn it like every single time.
Yeah.
I open it up like I can do that. I get the overall concept, and then all I have is particles, and I add some turbulence, and then I forget everything else.
Right. It definitely takes some constant use to be familiar with it, and it's such a deep and technical program. So here, this was probably 3 or 4 days of just playing around and trying to get something that looked relatively interesting. XP sheeter is just another dynamics object in X particles that gives some more fluid properties to your water as far as how the particles disperse. So the main water then is just is put in an open VDB mesher, which looks like that.
Yeah.
So then I just export the open VDB mesher as an alembic, and then I can bring that into my other file and kind of incorporate it there and texture it there. And then with the XP foam, so this is my water emitter, but the foam emitter emits all these other particles that kind of leave trails, and so it's basically you can put them in to dial in the amount of spray that you would like for that. And those I don't mesh; I just render those as particles with Redshift. So I would cache these and then copy just the cache files over to another project and incorporate them there. So
you basically end up with like 3 Alembic files or whatever.
One Alembic file for the main water, and then a particle cache for the XP foam.
So let's go into your texturing those.
For instance, the bookcase scene here where it opens up. So I brought in my Alembic file for the main water. So that's not really an X particles system anymore. That's just a geometry that I put some water texture on. But for all the foam and the splashes, I have I just brought over my particle simulation with my emitters here. Because it's foam and it doesn't really need to be geometry, I just have it set to point instances. And then I just have this white material on there. In its simplest term, I have these X particles, and to render them, I just have the Redshift object on them with set to point instances, and then applying a material to that.
Okay, yeah, that's about. And as far as the water goes, do you have a database sort of that you use for your Redshift materials? Like I love grayscale type stuff, or the Pixel Lab has some good things. And
it depends. I do have the Grayscale Gorilla libraries, and also a lot of the Pixel Lab libraries. I really like those. And then for something like this, just water, like Redshift has a built-in, standard material template that's just water, and I'll tweak that because I found that with water, especially with something like this, once it gets to all this, this light passing in here and bouncing through there, especially if you have GI on, like, and refractions, it just takes forever to render. So I kind of have to be careful and use some custom render settings to kind of optimize my refraction bounces and that, because I think the beginning of this sequence, I think the render times were under a minute per frame, but then when we got to like the water and the particles, it was getting to be like 10 minutes per frame, which is just not tenable usually.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next scene, which I thought was brilliant. You had the boat; it kind of flips open. You're inside the book itself, and the pages are rolling as water, which was brilliant. So, explain that breakdown, because I feel like if I were to take this and try it, the edges of my page would be like flapping around and crossing planes and things like that. So, do you put some sort of map on there?
All right. So what I used for the waves was XP Ocean, which is another X Particles deal.
I haven't done that one yet. As far as I've gotten with water and oceans, it was like Hot 4D years ago, and I think I still have it laying around and we'll mess with it.
XP Oceans is basically their version of Hot 4D. So XP Ocean lets you create an ocean just like Hot 4D. But you have all these X Particles tools that you can use with it too. You can also apply it as a deformer to a piece of geometry. So I had these two planes here. Oh, that's what I did. I turned them black there. So I had these 2 pages from the book, which I basically took my book model, and then I had to actually recreate the top pages because the geometry in the model was just all messy. So I had a pretty fine subdivision on this, on the pages. Because I wanted a lot of detail in the water. And XP Ocean lets you create these waves, and all the animation is all built into XP Ocean. I won't play it here because it's a little heavy for all the subdivisions that I have. But what I had here, and exactly like you said, so you can see the waves don't go to the edges because that wouldn't work for being in a book. So I just have these cylinder fields basically as fall-offs of the XP Ocean. So if I go into XP Ocean and I turn off the cylinder fields, you can see that's what it does. So once I apply this cylinder field so that it doesn't affect the edges of the page, then it kind of smooths out that transition.
I feel like that's one of those moments in like design process where you're like, that's what I'm looking for.
So then the other challenge I had was like I had all of these elements at different scales. Like I wanted my final shots to be at real world scale, so it would actually be the size of a book. But sometimes X Particles and some of the things you do with X Particles work better at a different scale. Mm-hmm. So like for this instance, the scale is quite large. So what I had to do was do it at this scale, and then I exported these as alembooks, and now I have this geometry that has that motion built in. So now it plays super nicely. So and because this is an alembic, I can just copy and paste it into another file and scale it as I need. So that's what I brought into this file, which is the master file that I have everything all laid out in.
So if you can, I'd love to see a screenshot of your exported image from Cinema 4D compared to your final image from the final video. So I was just curious, like what's in this clip and what's not, from cinema.
Yeah. We can jump into After Effects for that. So this is my After Effects file for this shot. And with this project, I finally got a handle on how to correctly use the ACES color space. Which I haven't ventured that road yet, so I'm curious as to what you did there. So I'll walk through that as well. So this is the raw render out of Cinema 4D. So I've got the book, all the depth of field is all rendered in Redshift. These clouds back here are a VBD sequence, and then the background is just a plate with a plane with an image on it that's just back far enough so that it's out of focus. So that's how I cheat my backgrounds lit. Yep. So rendering out of Redshift, I'm rendering in ACES CG color space, which is basically linear. And then what you have to do is on top of everything, you can see here I have this adjustment layer, which is converting everything from ACES to Rec 709. And that's using the Open Color IO plugin. And you can see over here, I've got the input space set to ACES CG, which is what's coming out of Cinema 4D. And then the output space is Rec 709. And what's cool about that is that ACES CG just has all this headroom and more color information than you would have if you just rendered out an RGB PNG, which I also did because I wanted to check with what I was seeing in cinema. So I have this top layer here is just my PNG sequence, just so I can compare. So you can see I'm switching it on and off, and it's virtually the same. I had to make some texture tweaks here, but that's the only thing that's changing.
Do you have any good resource on learning that conversion process? Yeah,
actually, there's a guy with some After Effects tutorials, AE Blues. If you look him up on YouTube, he's got 2 videos that go through a color managed workflow, and it's not specific to Cinema 4D. It's more of how do you work in ACES and how do you combine different color spaces and still work correctly in ACES. So that was super helpful. So that's kind of how I eventually, after months and months of struggling to get it figured out. So
yeah, that's what I need to venture down that road, because I'm like you, I'll just export a JPEG sequence and throw some color correction on it and be done.
Which a lot of time works, but I'll show you a specific instance where it doesn't work. So,
and do you export? Is that come as like an EXR, or is it just a?
Yeah, it's a EXR. So it's an EXR, and also out of Redshift, I'm using multiple AOVs, which are arbitrary output variables. And I think in this case, I'm only doing like a puzzle mat, just so I can have control over adjusting the boat and the book, and then like I have a depth mat in there in case I need that.
Yeah, that's about as far as my AOV knowledge goes, as those two.
But what I was also doing was separating out my lights into light groups. So what in Cinema 4D, what you can do is set up light groups and then export those light groups as separate passes, so you can have control over those lights in the comp. So this is just the beauty pass that came out of Cinema 4D. Let me make sure my RGB is off. Okay. And then I also had this pass, which was a super bright light from overhead to simulate the lightning. And I didn't animate the lightning in Cinema 4D. I just set up this light pass and then rendered that out as well. I mean,
and just added some opacity kind of, or exposure type things. Or?
So here, you can see I've got these keyframes here to just basically pop it on for the lightning passes. And it's all in the same render pass. So I didn't have to render it twice. I just rendered out once, and then using the extractor plugin, just extracted that out of my EXR. And then I also had a pass for volume. So I had this atmosphere, this fog noise. And then I had a pass for some dust and some rain. Now the rain passes were X particles as well, and I did those as separate passes too, just so I could.
Yeah, I was about to ask. I thought those may have been just some sort of add-on in After Effects, but so those are totally. We
Yes.
using the same camera. You just
Yeah, same camera, same file. I just stripped out all the materials and just put non-reflective black materials on all the objects because it's kind of hard to tell in the final, but I'm actually getting the rain collisions with some of the geometry in there and bouncing off the book and stuff. So
was that a render nightmare or like a simulation nightmare?
Not really. No, the rain is pretty straightforward. And I actually just rendered it. You know, there's like no lighting in there, so I just rendered it with basically just the shapes of the of the droplets coming through. So, and that I just added on top in After Effects here. The big hurdle with this shot was like there's that wave transition that transitions us from the book into the scene. And that I had to do in like separate passes because and of course it turns out that these, the waves that get rendered were not in focus. So, so I ended up just adding those as passes in After Effects too. So, and those just kind of get rendered on top. And then I also had another pass for this boat splash. So even though our waves are paper, I wanted to have some kind of splash on the surface. So that's just something subtle that just gets added in on top.
Yes, I noticed that. Like after I started studying it a little bit, I noticed that one little splash in the backside of the boat. I was like, "Holy cow, man!"
Yeah,
tons of detail.
So yeah, so these were the various passes. Rain and the spray and the VBD clouds and. So yeah, all those passes went into.
Were the clouds and things separate passes too, or did you put them all in the same EXR type?
I did have. So this here is my EXR that's rendered out of Cinema 4D, and using the extractor plugin, you can select which layer you want to do. Okay. So you can see here's all the passes that came out. So I had some beauty lights for the clouds, and then. The downlight, key light, depth, emission, and puzzle mat. So, and I may not have used all of those, but that's what got me to construct this. So all those just get added up into what looks like this. Cool. So that's a good frame. So I think I can demonstrate it here. So this is still just my CG render. I haven't really done any compositing other than combining the passes. Mm-hmm. So one of the cool things that you can do is, so with ACES, because it has this really broad dynamic range as far as colors go. So if I were to apply an exposure to this and really bump it up to like 5 stops, you can see that I'm still not clipping. Like even if I go up like 10 stops, I'm still technically not clipping on my waveform here because ACES has this roll off that really gives you a nice, I mean, I would never jump something up that high, but just has this really nice roll off in the highlights. However, if I were to apply the same exposure to my RGB image, which is up here, so let me turn that on. I'll solo that as well. So you can see what this same exposure is now doing to this RGB image. It's totally obliterating it. So like I only have like less than 2 stops and I'm already clipping the white here. So yeah, that's one of the key advantages of using ACES and compositing things in ACES. So
I feel like it's the equivalent of, whenever like the RE cameras and the Red cameras were coming out, and people were like, you have so much dynamic range, like a couple of stops, ACES is essentially the same thing, but for CG stuff,
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, ACES is really big in the, in the film world too, because that's what it stands for. It's the Academy color encoding system. So it's basically a complex in and out transformation that you can do from any camera, any format in to any format out, basically. So it's a nice way of standardizing things across the board. All right, so back to the composite. So this is then what the shot looked like once I had my other elements composited in there. But then on top of that, I was also compositing some practical elements. Like I have these rain spots. I think they're just kind of animate on and off. And when you're using ACES, you have to convert standard RGB elements into ACES, and you do that with the same OpenIO color plugin. So that's this here, and you can see it's just input is generic sRGB, and then the output is ACES CG. So then that's telling it that this asset now is getting transformed into ACES CG, so it can live in ACES CG land, so it will composite correctly with the renders, which are already ACES CG. And then again, the whole thing is being reconfirmed or converted to Rec 709 from ACES CG. So that's the only thing you have to remember is like your regular RGB assets need to be converted. So yeah, it's several layers of different sort of rain effects and little lens things, and then I had some foreground rain that was just a stock element. One of the problems I was having was that this ship wasn't really being tossed around by these waves. It was really just sitting on top of it. So we had like areas here where we have these collisions where the water is just going through the ship. I didn't have enough time to really figure that out and get that working in a true dynamic sense. So I did the next best thing by obscuring it in the comp. So I have some layers of this distortion effect that I put on top of the really offending parts. I think right here was one. Basically using these lens effects to kind of distort the super offending images, the areas of the image. So those were the practical elements that I layered on top of that. So then I have some sort of standard go-to things that I do to my images, optical flares, of course. And here they're very subtle, but I'm just using these lens orbs just to kind of give us some further lens sort of grittiness. In addition to the depth of field coming out of Cinema 4D and Redshift, I have this rack focus that happens at the beginning of the shot. So instead of defocusing everything in Cinema, I'll just, if I have to do a rack focus for everything, I'll just do it in post with the Frischlift lens care plugin.
Yeah, so you don't have a depth pass on that. You're just doing it just with the plugin.
Correct. You can do it both ways, but for this instance, it's just basically blurring the whole thing. Yeah. And then I think there's a couple more layers of like some smoke texture, just to kind of give some subtle movement in the image as well.
I feel like those two, they really kind of help draw your eye to the center. They say this stuff isn't important, but this is.
And then I have a good collection of stock elements and such from. This is from Triune Digital, which is the Film Riot guys, and they have a bunch of like lens stuff that I'm incorporating as well. In addition to that lightning pass that I have another adjustment layer that I'm flashing, just bumping up the exposure and really flashing to accentuate the lightning. And you can see here again with ACES in my scopes here, even though I'm adjusting the overall exposure by quite a bit, I'm still not clipping in the color information that goes out. So what that also means is that, let's say, for instance, this we're going to, instead of just being a final output from me, if it had to go to a colorist or something, I could just set my ACES, set my output space. So instead of going to Rec 709, I could go out to like ACES CCTV, which then gives this then would be output to the colorist, who then has all of this color information, sort of like a flat, like a log file, like out of a camera. So that's another reason why ACES CG is or ACES is super flexible, because I'm just outputting this myself. I'm just putting it out to sRGB. All right. So then once I have all of my practical and CG elements all kind of combined, then I'll jump in and do some color correction and grading, and then adding in just some super fine details. One of my tricks, my go-to tricks, is just adding a color solid. And it's very subtle because it's only like at 5%, is this sort of cyan glow that's kind of coming off the edge of the frame. And depending on the lighting that I'm going with, that kind of just simulates like some sort of off camera or sort of light leak kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then I'll start to do just some overall color correction using Colorista. And here I think I'm just using a bit of contrast, and then, I think just a little teeny bit of contrast is very, very subtle on that. And that's what I found when using this many adjustment layers, is that a little goes a long way with that stuff. So what I'll typically do as well is I'll defocus everything. So I am using the Frisch Lift lens care plugin again, and this is only set to 0.5 pixel blur. But what that does is it softens up all of the CG edges. So kind of have to balance that with whatever detail I'm showing in the scene. But overall, it just sort of kind of tends to sort of chill everything out. And what I'm going for in the composite is trying to incorporate as many photographic effects. Even though my work isn't photo real, I try to impart a photographic quality to it. If you look at a picture from any world of photography, there's nothing that's absolutely in razor sharp focus. There's always something that's a little soft. So I found just applying a global blur is very helpful in achieving that.
Yeah, I see. Like you even have like lens distortion on there for the same reason that a camera lens is going to, distort your images and stuff. Stuff like that's good. And
then another trick that I use is turbulent displace, and this may not even come across in the screen capture, but and this turbulent displace is set to like its absolute minimum, so like a amount of 10 with a size of 2. It's really sort of just kind of junking up the straight lines, as I like to refer to it, just so that there's not these like perfectly straight lines. Just overall, it kind of just dirties up the straight lines in the image. More adjustment layers with more sort of photographic effects. So love vignettes. So usually there's some type of vignette and again, it just helps to focus the eye where to go. One of my new favorite plugins is Deep Glow.
I love Deep Glow.
And that I just apply very, very sparingly, but it just kind of gives this luminous quality to the image, and I just kind of have this like very soft kind of bloom in the image that is really nice. And I really like how you can have chromatic aberration in that glow as well. Yeah,
I think things like plugins like Deep Glow, I'm like, all right, After Effects, can you just buy this and own? Like, why didn't you do this in the first place? Theirs is like so cheap feeling versus Deep Glow, so it's worth every penny.
Yeah, I love using Red Giant's Magic Bullet Looks. If you haven't used Magic Bullet Looks, it's basically a application within the application that lets you basically dial in all these tools and have them within just this one interface, but I usually split things out just so I can have further control over that. So in this instance, I'm just applying a lens distortion. So yeah, this is just a lens distortion. That's just to give me a slight little stretching out on the edges there, which then when the camera's moving, I think helps a lot de-CGing the image, as it were. And then I really like softening the edges as well. And then I'm usually applying some type of color LUT. Again, I'm just using Magic Bullet Looks and then dialing in the adjustment layer to suit my needs. So like this LUT is only applied at 50%. So that's kind of why I break out all the different layers.
Yeah, whenever I mean, I haven't used their actual like LUTs or anything in a while, but back in the day, I feel like they were always about 50% too much. Like they were a bit extreme. So I guess, are you picking pre-made ones and then adjusting from there, or just okay.
I've got a handful of LUTs that I kind of just scroll through and see what kind of fits the image, and
that green to blue vibe, it's nice, and the pages are still really warm, which is cool.
Yeah. And then yet another step in the sort of de-CGing of the image is adding chromatic aberration, and again, super subtle on this. Like it's, you may not even be able to see it in the capture too, but basically just the further out on the edge of the screen you are, the more divergence there is in the alignment of the red, green, and blue pixels, which typically happens on a camera lens. And then once that's done, I usually put on some pop through Magic Bullet Looks, which is basically a form of sharpening that just brings back some of the detail I might have lost with all of these adjustment layers. And I just dial that in very, very subtly. So in this, so I should note that all of these renders and all this composite was done at standard HD 1920 by 1080. But we wanted to deliver 4K, and what I've been experimenting with was using Video Enhance from Topaz Labs, the Video Enhance AI, to upscale these images. So that's what I did. So I rendered out these shots in standard HD, and then ran them all through the Video Enhance AI, and then from there, I was able to get 4K masters. Let me see if I have.
What's the time frame on that, like per shot? Let's say this is a 5 second, 6 second shot.
It's super quick. It's just like a minute or so per shot.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
man, computers, man. How do they work? It's insane.
While you're looking, I did that for Back to Life too. I used that same Video Enhance deal. Initially, I had purchased they have like an image one that you can import image sequences, and I thought, let me do with my EXRs, or let me do that, and then I just quickly realized that it was just going to take forever, as opposed to just doing it on the
would you like give them like a ProRes file or
yeah, you just input whatever ProRes render that you MOV that you exported out of After Effects, and you just run it through it, and it does a pretty good job of up-resing it to 4K or even whatever. Yeah. I think they may even go up to 8K if you wanted to.
If you're like me, you'd watch like crime shows when they're like, all right, let's enhance these pixels. You're like, can't do that. That's stupid. That's movie dumb stuff. But now I'm like, well, touche.
Well, maybe that's for another time. But anyway, so I up-resed the footage, and then after I up-resed, I did one of my favorite plugins is Film Convert, which just overall gives film grain and a little bit of color response like film to the whole thing, which then just totally kind of unifies everything together. So,
and you don't change any of the settings on that, because you typically would pick a camera profile, but you don't need to change any regarding ACEs or any of that kind of stuff.
No, actually, I apply. It seems to work better after the ACEs, so that's why I did it after I rendered out and after I up-res, because I didn't want to up-res stuff that had noise in it. So once I had the up-res footage, then I did the film convert, and after that, once I up-res, it was not in ACEs anymore. It was still just the Rec 709 version. It's just I just use a generic RGB as far as the camera goes, and then I usually dial back the chroma and luma responses on the film stock, and then just adjust the noise size to taste, and try to get that balance between what's too much and not enough. Which you never know once things get compressed down and down in different formats. But I think all told, all of the subtleties go into really having a big effect on the image. So going from this basically being our final to this, which is where we started, sort of a big departure. But that's how the shots usually come together.
All right, a couple of quick questions we spent. That was the main thing I wanted to focus on was like compositing because it all comes together.
Yeah.
But just to hit a couple of little points in the video. So the bubbles I thought looked so good with the whale and they're kind of floating up. They seem to be sort of morphing just like bubbles. What was your take on that and process on that?
Yeah, that was X particles once again.
Because they act very much like bubbles, like they're kind of breaking up. Is that adding
and
that VDB mesher on that maybe a little bit?
Yes, it's the I think it's the fluid effects in X particles, and it's very simple. Just had some emitters emitting some different sizes, and then using the open VDB mesher. And it would kind of, clump some of them together and some of them would just be distinct. So, yeah, that was, and I just did, a couple of variations of those and export those as Alembics and then just kind of populated them in my scene.
Yeah, really nice. And your reflection on that page, is that like a gobo kind of?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a caustic pattern. It is animated. And
I was looking at it. It does kind of move a bit.
So yeah, it's just basically a spotlight up above, and then I have some a redshift environment with so it catches the volumetrics there, and then it's just shining down on the book with this caustic pattern.
The Middle Eastern shot, the city. I feel like I've always had a hard time finding good old buildings. Where was your go-to for that? And they like pop up and everything. Yeah,
these were basically a set from photobash.co, I believe. They have a kit of ancient buildings. Like I have a ton of kitbash stuff. Like I have tons of, but I didn't have.
I've seen some of that. Yeah, kitbash,
but I didn't. Okay. But I didn't have a city that had the right feel, and these, while probably not terribly accurate, but just had the right feel. So,
so far, no one has said anything about the whale, so I think we're okay on the city. Yeah, I would say our disclaimer on that as well. It says a tail of a whale, so maybe a whale, maybe not.
Yeah. But and this, popping up was just a simple MoGraph effector. I used a lot of the Redshift matrix scatter, which is a much more efficient way to use, instead of using a cloner, it's basically using a matrix scatter because using that, it's super efficient and, you can scatter tons and tons of stuff with very little impact on your performance.
I'll have to look into that because I'll default to cloners and random effectors and stuff so fast. So I'll need to look into that.
And it's cool because you can use all the same MoGraph effectors on the matrix scatter. So, cool. So that's just what I'm doing here is just basically just scaling these all up using a fall off and boom, they're there.
The page tear. Give me a rundown of that.
Yeah, this was fun to play with. It took me a little while to kind of get something that I was satisfied with, but this is all Cinema 4D's built-in cloth dynamics.
Okay.
So I just set up a simple plane, and then I had the growth coming out was X particles for the spline anyway, and then I just had some geometry that I used a spline wrap. And then just animated it along that spline. And then I set up this plane and then just turned it into cloth and then used sort of some dummy colliders just to kind of poke around in that area.
So the spline is not actually tearing the page. You just have some other stuff in there?
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like it's reacting exactly to the
very good
thing. So did you use the new X particles like their plant stuff?
No, this was done before that came out. Yeah. So I had it's you don't see all this detail in the shot, but whatever. So the main tear again was this plane. Oh, this was for the this version of the file is just for the particle. So yeah, this is just an alembic now, and I emitted some particles just for the sort of dust to come out. Okay, yeah. So this was an alembic that I just exported out. But yeah, it was basically Cinema 4D's cloth dynamics, just using some dummy colliders in there just to kind of get some motion coming up through that, and then having it so it's tearing. This was in version 25, but I understand that version 26 has a whole new cloth system that's much more efficient. So I don't know if
Don't you love that, man? That happens as soon as I'm like, all right, R25, got it. All my plugins are installed, ready to go. New R26.
Right. Yeah. So that that was that combined in there, and goes by super quick, but I think it adds a lot. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Are you
great.
putting some bokeh effects on your lens blur and redshift?
Yes, that's another big part of that. Is I have in the camera in the redshift camera, there's in the bokeh tab, there is a place where you can put in an image for your bokeh shape, and this is actually someone in the redshift community created these realistic bokeh shapes based on anamorphic lenses. So you can see this one is kind of oval with some chromatic aberration in it. And what that then does is, as you blur things, it just doesn't blur out as a circle. It blurs out as you can see. So you can see here, like all of the particles and stuff, they have this oval bokeh. So that's all from that image. On the blurring that I'm doing in post, which you can see at the beginning here. All right. So in the final, you can see this wasn't done in redshift. This was a blur that was done in post, but with the Frischlift lens care, it lets you choose your own shape as well. So I try to match it as closely as possible. So
it looks good. Yeah. Grayscale just released a whole pack of those too.
Yes. Yeah. I'm excited to try those. And this is another good example of where ACES really comes in handy, especially when blurring and trying to get these bokehs. You wouldn't be able to do it to this degree with just the PNG RGB image, because with in the ACES version, when you're applying the blur before you convert back to ACES, it really retains all this highlight information there, so it looks 100 times better than it would in just using RGB. So.
Man, thanks so much. Hopefully, anybody, people that watch this are able to take something from it and learn something from it. I know now I got to up my game for sure. I've been avoiding the whole color space stuff for way too long.
It's taken a few months for me to get my head around it, but those two videos that I mentioned from AE Blues really helped me kind of see not only the advantages, but how they should be used and why to use them. So very, very helpful.
Well, Gustaf, you're an absolute legend, super talented, and I'm grateful to call you friend and have you as a designer with Pixel Preacher. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah,
this was a fun project. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. That's going to be it for now. We look forward to maybe doing some more of these and look forward to seeing what else Gustaf comes up with and what else we put out for you. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.